There are two zoos in the United States, the St. Louis Zoo and the San Diego Zoo. If you ever visited these zoos, the Bronx Zoo looks like a menagerie compared to those zoos. You see things there, you're amazed. Whatever species over there in St. Louis, they have a bird pavilion. You go to that pavilion, you see birds, the plumage, the beaks, they look like they're artificial. The beauty is not to be believed. It's amazing, the beauty, and you're touched by it. The greens and the yellows and the orange, whether parrots or various different type of birds. And you see other species, amazed. And you're touched. So there's the Talmud says, we have various colors. Why did God create the world drab green? Everything is just drab green. So the Talmud explains that a human being is born with senses. And when our senses are touched in a certain way, we become activated. We become invigorated when you're touched. So by the eye seeing things with stimuli, color is stimuli. Certain sounds are stimuli. And that actually revs up the system to be able to function at a more advanced capacity. And it's known fact, I never visit Russia, that in Russia, alcoholism is a major problem. Why? So you speak to Russians, the winter in Russia, everything is dark, drab, damp, and cold. People are depressed because there's no excitement. The whole state of being of that country is depressing. The country basically shuts down. The long Russian winter. When people approach this type of emotion and mindset, what do you think they do? They drown themselves in alcohol to escape that misery, that depression. That's why alcoholism is such a problem in Russia. If God would have created the world in this drab setting, with all out the stimuli, people would not get excited or attracted. It would touch in a certain way. You see these birds, you could say a bracha. That's how wondrous God's creation is. It's not to be believed. I remember I once went down to Eilat, and over there they have an Eilat. I forgot what they call it in Hebrew. It's a structure which is submerged under the ocean. And you go there and you look out the window, you could see under the ocean. You see fish, and you see over there they have special coral, different colors, coral. You have purple, yellow, orange, I never knew what coral was. It's a rock. So I had a person, he was hired by someone for me. He's the best desert guide in Israel. He knows the desert like the palm of his hand. And he first gave me a tour of the desert in Eilat and desert. And we get into this old Jeep of his. The tires were the size of like a truck tires. And we're going over boulders, and the Jeep is going in every direction. And we get out, and he says, I want to show you something. You're in this flat location, flat, no inclines, no hills, straight, and you have granite walls which tower 1,000 feet straight up. And it's all desolation there, okay? So he says, what would you do if you find yourself here, you have no water, how do you survive? So he goes over and he takes a little plant that's growing in this arid soil. He pulls it out and he squeezes it. It's like a sponge. It's filled with water. And he shows me other things, how you survive in the desert. As I said, he's the best desert guide in Israel, and he's teaching me about the desert. So I say to him, isn't it wondrous? God created a world that total desolation in the desert, and yet the things within the desert which you believe don't exist, and it's filled with water. It's like pulling out a hose out of the ground, and you're able to survive because there's enough water to hydrate the person. So the person says, I get it. Okay. It was very hot. He says, we have to go to the canteen and get some water. We shouldn't become dehydrated. We go into the canteen area, and there in Eilat, you have ostriches. An ostrich is a desert bird. It's the bird of the desert. You have the screaming, the howling of birds, those are ostriches. And they raise them down there. And we go into this canteen. All the furniture is made of wicker furniture. And they have tables, small tables, and around each table there are 4 chairs. And this person is a secular Israeli. At that time, he must have already been in his mid-70s. And he was from the Shomer HaTzoyeh kibbutz. That was a kibbutz. They believed in nothing. Nothing. No God. Judaism was a culture. That's all it was. And he says to me, he says, you know what we do here? We're in this canteen. He says, do you know what we do here Friday night? We sit and we play cards. We smoke cigarettes and we eat chulent. Yeah, what he says to me. That's what he says. That's what they do Friday night. Cards, cigarettes, and chulent. I said, okay. And here I'm talking, we just came out of the desert. Do you see what God created? It's amazing. The word God doesn't resonate in this man's mind at all, okay? We go to this sunken structure which has windows, and he starts explaining to what coral is. There's living coral and there's dead coral. What is living coral? Living coral is a living organism that if a fish goes near it, it releases an acid that the fish gets burnt from that acid. That's how acidic it is, that it's like sulfuric acid. Release it, even a shark won't go near it. But it's a living entity. A dead coral means that organism died, and all that's left is the rock. And you have different kinds of coral. Sometimes you see it swaying underwater. The reason why it's swaying is because really it's living coral. And if you go near it, if you touch it with your bare hands, you get burnt from the excretions of that coral. He said, it's amazing. He's explaining, I said, it's amazing. God created this purple, green, orange, everything. And he shows me the different one, if it's alive, not alive. I said, it's amazing how God created entities, how they're able to protect themselves to survive. And I say, God's is almost wherever you turn, you have God's fingerprint. You can't deny God's existence. This is what I'm talking to this man, who clearly believes in nothing. As much as I talk to him, it goes right over his head. It doesn't register as much as Nyota. You understand? But how could you not? You go to Taj Mahal. You go to Versailles. You're amazed at the architecture. And say, what's the first question you'll ask? Who's the architect? Who planned it? Who are the artisans? Who are the masters of these paintings? That's the first question you ask. It didn't happen by itself. But yet he's explaining to me the intricacies and how ingenious it is. And came by itself. You understand? And I keep trying to emphasize and clarify. It's like, it's preposterous to say it came by itself. It doesn't register. He knows he eats cholent, smokes cigarettes, and plays cards Friday night in the canteen. When he has these ostrich birds howling, like because they're desert birds. Okay. You have seasons. You have autumn. You have spring. You have winter. You have spring. You have summer. What does the forest look like in the winter? The bears are stripped. The trees are stripped of leaves, no vegetation, nothing. All of a sudden, spring comes, things start budding. And eventually the leaves, eventually the fruits. It's like an ex nihilo. There was total desolation, death, and all of a sudden there's a resurgence of life. It's amazing. Do people ever stop to think how this works? Well, that's the way it is. You have seasons, and that's what happens. There's a cycle. People are born, people die. There's a cycle. It's called seasons. Don't you think all these things, they're takeaways? It's to alert you. Years ago, they had many synagogues on the Lower East Side. On every block, they maybe had 3-4 synagogues. And as the neighborhood was changing, each synagogue barely had a minyan, barely had a quorum of Jews. You'd go in, you'd have benches that you could seat 500 people there. Each bench had a number on it with a nameplate. Most of those nameplates, the people haven't been alive for maybe 30, 40 years. And eventually they shut them down, and I don't know what they did with that furniture. No, what was isn't. It's amazing. You knew some of those people. Once they're not here, they're forgotten forever. What about their values, their contributions? It's like it never was. Well, that's life cycle. You could have learned so much from these people. Sage wisdom today. Could we talk about sage wisdom today? About anybody in the generation we live in? Sage wisdom, you'd say sage, they say the sage bush. Sage is a spice, sage. You go to a health food store, you got sage. That's about it. They don't know what sage is, they know what wisdom is. There's no appreciation of anything. People's heads are in the sand. Today, you ask people questions. You ask them who's the Secretary of State. You ask about World War II. Ask about anything. They never heard the names of these people. That's how out of touch they are. When one learns, how do you learn? If you're a good observer and you have a keen eye, we could talk about discernment, analysis, evaluation. But if everything's all gray, and the only thing that attracts your attention is one thing, so most things you see, you don't even notice. Therefore, there's nothing to learn from because there are no takeaways. Because you notice nothing. That's what it is. A Jew, if you're connected, you have an obligation, many obligations. And these obligations are so vital. I'm not even talking about religion, to our function as intellectual beings. Because we're obligated to be engaged in certain things which educate us, which touch us, and we need continuous evaluations and assessments. Does it meet the grade? Does it not meet the grade? Fill in, that be black, that be square. You have to articulate things properly. Certain things you can't say from memory, as we read from the script, from the text. There's so many criteria that have to be met. There's so much focus you have to have. Otherwise, you can't be an observant Jew. So how many levels is a Jew touched in a week of observance? You come to the Shabbos. You could do things and you're not do many things. Even though once the Shabbos ends, whatever you couldn't do, you could do. So during the week, you don't appreciate. All Shabbos comes, this yet, that not. Immediately, the time creates a setting for discernment. Was now something that was permitted, it's not permitted. So you have to focus. What am I doing? Am I permitted to do this? I'm not permitted to do that. Automatically, that trains the mind and the eye to make assessments and evaluation and discernments, which were touched. I'm not even talking about the spiritual touching. We're touched spiritually, which we are. We're spiritualized by this. Just the reality. There's a famous word from the Maral, from the Ramchal, that in Judaism, holidays are much more than commemorations. Holidays that we have, what we call Yom Tovim, festivals. What are we celebrating? We're celebrating an event of the past, redemption from Egypt, the Seder night, the Sukkah for 7 days. All these things are symbolisms representing something. What happened at the Seder night when we sit and eat the matzah? That's the 15th night of Passover, of Nisan. The greatest miracle took place. You know what God did? It was the 10th plague. The firstborn of the Egyptians were killed by God. All the firstborn in one swoop. After that happened, Pharaoh says, please leave. And that's when we borrowed all the valuables of the Egyptians. And we left. Every year at that moment, on the 15th day of Nisan, the energies that brought about those events of that particular time in history, those energies repeat themselves. Now the question is, how are we beneficiaries of those energies? How are we touched by those energies? If you recreate a setting as prescribed by the Torah, what you do? You sit and you eat the matzah. You recline as free men. You drink the 4 cups of wine, which commemorate the 4 expressions of redemption. You eat the bitter herbs, which is to recall the embitterment of our lives in the bondage. You do all these things. You're creating vessels to be able to capture these energies, to be a beneficiary of what they were going back thousands of years ago. And every year, these energies are released again. So it's more than just we're commemorating something. The commemoration is to create the setting to be the beneficiaries of those energies, which are released every year at that particular moment. This is what's going on. We have 6 days, weekdays, ordinary days. The 7th day comes, it's holy. It's the holiest day of the year. It's called the Shabbos, or in other words, the Sabbath, or the Shabbat, or the Shabbat, depends which community you come from. What is the Shabbos? On the 7th day of creation, after the world was complete, after 6 days, and Adam was there and driven out of Garden of Eden, God entered into his existence. And he illuminated, he sanctified this existence. Existence started to radiate with holiness. Every 7th day of the week, the cycle repeats itself. 6 days are ordinary. The 7th day, God re-enters into existence. The level of spiritualization is something, there's nothing compared to it. Do we sense it? Unless you're at a certain level, you don't sense the holiness of Shabbos. Shabbos is considered a semblance of the world to come. If you observe the Shabbos properly, you're able to have a relation with God in a special way. Because the holiness of Shabbos is based and rooted in God's presence being here. That's the understanding. And every holiday is the same thing. Even rabbinical holidays, Hanukkah. What happened on Hanukkah, we defeated the Greeks, as we say in the paragraph, in the Amidah. The multitudes in the hands of the few, the impure in the hands of the pure, the evil in the hands of the right, all that. Those energies every year repeat themselves exactly on the 25th of the month of Kislev, when they refurbished the temple and when they lit the menorah. Enough oil to burn one day, burned 8 days. We, to commemorate, we light that oil for 8 days. Each day adding another candle. That's again, although it's only rabbinical, that's to capture those energies that we should be beneficiaries of those energies. But all that, it contributes that if we do observe it, and we all, that contributes to the perfection of existence. That's part of the spiritualization of existence. And that's the objective of creation. And that's the purpose of the Jewish people. To be partners with God, to bring about perfection ourselves and perfect the world, that the world eventually will be spiritualized sufficiently that God can enter into this world and God can be with man rather than be in heaven with the angels. God wants to be with the ones who chose to be who they are, not the ones who were endowed to be who they are and what they are. Those are the angels. We read in Pirkei Avos that if 10 people are studying Torah, Shechina Beineim, the divine presence is with these 10 people. But divine presence is on the Temple Mount. It's in heaven. 10 people as a quorum study Torah together. Shechina, the divine presence is with them. What about 5 people study Torah? Shechina, divine presence with them. What about 3 people? Divine presence with them. What about 2 people also? What about 1? So the Maral of Prague explains, so if even 1, the divine presence is with them, so what do we have to talk about 10? We went from 10 to 5 to 3, 2, and 1. What's going on? So he explains, whenever we say Shechini Moyim, it doesn't mean the same level of divine presence. It's a different intensity. As we know, the intensity of the divine presence in the Holy of Holy, that's the holiest location in existence. There's nowhere else in the world which has that degree of holiness. Because over there it's intensified. 5, it's a greater intensity of God's presence. 10, 5 less. 3 also, it has, but it's not quite the same. 2, even 1 has, but it's not comparable, not to 10, to 5, 3, or 2. That's the understanding. But each of us, if we engage, even in this world, in this mundane world, this physical world, engaging in that process, we can have a relationship with Shekhinah, with God, at that special level. Could you imagine? You light Hanukkah candles on Purim. You know, if you're putting on a mock Seder, I use the word mock. You know, they have these interdenominational Seders. You know, the kids from the church with the Reformed temple, and they sing Mos Sur at the Seder, the 2 of them, this group. And they eat latkes, you know, and they spin the dreidel. I'm being very, you know, very, very facetious here. That's about what you're doing. King Solomon says in Koheles, everything in its proper time. You got to do it right in its proper time. A man is 85 and he's joining the Junior Olympics to do the pole vault over a 25-foot pole. Can you imagine where this guy's going? I'm not sure where he's going. He can't even pick up the pole, throw with the pole. Then he's going to be a disc thrower. He loses his balance and he breaks his hip. You understand? Everything in its proper time. You got to know who you are, and where you are. I think I could be prime minister. Could you please sign your name just to pass security? Sorry, they never taught me how to sign my name. Do you even know what the prime minister mean? Well, I know what prime I know means. The steak is prime rib. That's not what the prime minister is all about. Like I say, if it would be Purim, I'd laugh, but unfortunately, it's not Purim. That's why we should all cry. That's how serious the moment of this existence is. As they say, people don't get it. But if you begin getting it and understanding there's an order and there's a sequence and there's a time and space and a purpose, then you see existence be invaluable. And you could move mountains and even beyond that, if you do it right. Okay, I'm going to stop here today.